welcome back to Creative Outcomes. On today's episode, we're sitting down with Dave Bunce. Dave is the current CEO of Morphio, which is a marketing technology software. He is a public accounting survivor and was recently on the selling side of an acquisition, which is where we're going to focus on today's conversation: the why, the how, and the what we wish we would have known. Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Meredith and Ryan. Great to have you. Great to be here.
Good, awesome. So let's jump right into things. So first, why did you sell the agency?
Yeah, the decision to sell was based on being very entrepreneurial, and we had started to make connections and build relationships with people through the agency that were bringing ideas and the next thing to us. We had been in business for about a decade as an agency, and really it was time to let our entrepreneurial wings fly, and so it was motivated purely by looking for something new.
So how did you guys find the buyer? Did they approach you? Did you just networking connections? What did that look like?
Yeah, they approached us, but it was actually pretty serendipitous timing. We had engaged an M&A firm on, I think it was October 20th of 2019, and 3 days later, we got a notice from LinkedIn, somebody reaching out to say, "Hey, I'm currently buying agencies. You came up. Can we chat?" And it just happened at that same timing. But ultimately, the buyer reached out to us for sure.
Okay.
Did you know them ahead of time, or like just this is
Yeah, it was geographic, and it was mutual connection.
Okay.
So it was one of those messages you get when you say, "Hey, so-and-so, I'm friends," or it looks like we're both friends with person X. And they had great things to say about you, would love to connect and talk more about your succession planning. It was very much a soft sell message.
Interesting.
Did you guys have a relationship with the M&A who you had reached out to like start the conversation?
We did. Yeah, we had a bit of a relationship there already between an executive there and one of our owners. That conversation, and I can go into it into a bit of detail here. It was an interesting experience going through an advisor, and in the end, I would say an advisor helped the process more than hurt. So just something that we can keep diving into. But
yep.
Yeah, I'm sure that was not an inexpensive advisor. So was it worth it to have the advisor?
It's a big question. In the end, yes. I think the question becomes, though, what or how we could have gotten that same value more proactively from our ongoing professional service providers, and not to make this just a plug for accountants, but we would have been.
Go ahead. Keep going, for sure. Yeah, no. Plug it. I'm just kidding.
It was an expensive decision to go through the M&A firm, and the value that they ultimately provided was a lot of due diligence prep and a lot of advice that we could have been more proactive with through getting better professional services earlier on in our agency life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so that kind of tracks. I've been through one on the sort of client side or the agency side, one acquisition, and we also hired an advisor. And I would say my experience was very similar to yours, where it was like in the end, it was definitely worth it. It was quite expensive. And I'd say the primary value was like, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so in our case, we didn't necessarily have any shortcomings on our vendor side or any other relationship. But it was like this incredibly nerve-wracking, kind of lonely experience where you get questions and you're just like, I'm not sure if that question is something I shouldn't worry about or is going to blow this whole thing up. Like, you just don't know. And so having somebody who has experience, whether it's an M&A advisor or an accounting firm or somebody else who has been through a couple of reps, if you don't have that, it's worth it.
Yeah. And what I found in that discussion as well was it gave us a bit of an impartial intermediary for the negotiation. And I think for us, especially myself being management and being the COO at the time, these were the people that were going to become my boss. So I'm negotiating on behalf of my former boss with my new boss. And so having that intermediary, whether again it be M&A firm, whether it be professional service provider of some type, being involved in that and advocating for you made it a lot easier for me to maintain really strong, positive working relationships while still maximizing our value, because there was definitely negotiation and it made it less uncomfortable for me.
So you said that they reached out to you on LinkedIn. Why did they want to buy you? They were just trying to grow their own agency, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so they reached out. They're going through a bit of a leveraged buyout model where they're buying a few different agencies. And right now, I think their portfolio is at about 10 or 12 businesses. And really, what they were looking for, what made us attractive, was one, recurring revenue. I think everybody in the agency world keeps talking about that right now, but yes, 2/3 of our business was AOR, recurring revenue work. And then selling projects to those people represented another 15 or 20%. So really a fairly strong, predictable revenue base made us attractive. And then the other thing I would say too, that they reached out to us, or part of the reason they liked it, was having a bit of leadership succession. So I was COO. We had a CEO that was separate from majority ownership. We had options and variable comp in play, but we aren't majority owners, and so that made us attractive because from a transition standpoint, they knew that they could make this deal work and still have a functioning management team in play.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Makes sense.
How did negotiations go? I know you guys were building, working on Morphio within the agency, right? Mm-hmm. And so what did the negotiations look like to, that's obviously not included. That was not included in the deal, right?
Right.
The transition of Morphio. Yeah. So how did negotiations go? What did that look like? Yeah,
the biggest thing that came down to sort of negotiation was around adjusting and normalizing the business results. And so now I'm going to put on my public accounting hat and talk and what is normal and not. And to kind of answer those, like, I wish I knew this scenario. We had been running the business. I don't want to call it a lifestyle business necessarily, but there were conferences for 20 people to go to Banff running through the P&L, and there was the golf club and all of those things.
Sure.
Which for us ended up being negotiation points of should this be adjusted or not? And in our mind, it was, this is all just us going and having fun. And from the buyer's perspective, they could definitely argue or say, well, did you take clients with you? And then we say yes. And then they say, okay, well, did you increase your revenue after you took them to said conference? Well, yeah, sure, because we talked about these types of opportunities. Well, then, you keep, so it became a gray area for what in our mind didn't need to be, or in hindsight didn't need to be. So that was one thing, I think if we had started cleaning that up earlier and started to understand those implications or carve them out more clearly, at least from a reporting and transaction perspective, that would have been something we would definitely do differently.
So on the, I follow up on that, but first, so on the negotiation, obviously there's like kind of, and you can tell me if this is how it went, but generally speaking, these deals are on multiples of EBITDA, right? And so what you're talking about is, what is EBITDA, right? And in your case, you had what you would claim as not personal expenses, but non-necessary expenses, right? That was dragging your EBITDA down. So the point is, like, what we're showing on our P&L, it actually should be much higher because we didn't need to do the Banff conference and all these other things. So that's like point one. And then point two would be like, what's the multiple I'm going to apply against that EBITDA to get to whatever the purchase price is? Was there a lot of discussion on the multiple? Like, where did that come from? And is that how this thing was valued?
Yes, you're right. On both fronts, that is how it was valued. And also there was definitely discussion on it. The way that we started, or the way the negotiation started, was the buyer said we typically do between 3 to 5 times is what they anchored it, because we let them anchor the offer. So we knew where they were in there. And then from there, we said, okay, you're at this to this. Well, remember, part of the reason you want to buy us is recurring revenue, separated management team, talking about average length of client relationship. We are sitting at, AORs of 3+ years, which for a marketing industry, that has turnover. That's solid. So we use all of that to negotiate our way up from their anchor, and ended up in a reasonable spot where we got them to their highest end, if you will, in their range. And that was kind of the moderate or expected range for us, for sure.
Interesting.
Was Morphio involved in that in the negotiations at all, or was it always like just off the table?
Yeah, what's interesting about that is we had carved out the IP prior to, and that was one of those smart moves in some ways. Depends on what we wanted to do, but we made it flexible in the sense of Morphio was an internal project for us, just to give context, right? So it was an R&D.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to just describe.
Yeah, so Morphio is a marketing technology platform that's focused on analyzing digital marketing results, providing people with alerts and notifications based on performance. So we used it as a way to gain efficiencies on our marketing team to say, how do we improve our service levels and how do we get more revenue per person, basically, right?
Yeah.
So the way that conversation went was, at that point, we knew we wanted to pursue it as its own business. So we weren't going to put it into the deal. But what did become part of the negotiation or the package in the end was the licensing of the software to the buyer, because it was considered a sort of competitive advantage / business driver. So we negotiated that in.
Yeah, makes sense.
So if you had to go through the sale again, what would you do differently?
Yes. The one thing I think we could have done a better job on was, and to give you sort of deal structure, we got our multiple, but there's different components of that, right? You've got here's some cash today, here's some cash in a little bit for a net working capital adjustment.
Yep.
Then there's let's see how the business does. Then we also took some shares in the parent company back. And there was also a non-controlling interest piece that was retained as well. I think if I was to do it differently, the deal got a bit overly complicated because of all those different streams. And they ended up in there because, everybody has different goals and motivations.
Yep.
And obviously the seller wants as much cash up front and as little risk, and the buyer wants, the longest.
The opposite of that.
That's right.
So, what we ended up doing to make the deal work was we fit within this middle ground that kind of tried to serve everybody's needs. But what it did was create complexity in terms of the types of consideration that we got for the sale. That made it overly complicated and confusing. So that was the issue there, and that's one thing I would definitely do differently, especially on the non-controlling part. Is like, give us the earnout. Let us, I understand there's some risk, so let's take that risk with you to some extent on the last multiple or whatever you want to call it. But let's not tie this in so much that it's limiting in the future.
All right, you talked about this a little bit offline, but I think it'd be interesting to talk about here as well, which is, and I think interesting for the folks who are listening to this that are not only thinking, years ahead that they might get some liquidity and be purchased, but also that they might look for means of acquiring agencies to get inorganic growth. And that's something that you did at your agency as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about the strategy behind that and how it worked for you guys?
Yeah, for sure. So we did... the way we looked at our acquisitions were twofold. One was either, complementary offerings, like what skill set did we need to round out, or what geography did we want to cover or what markets did we anticipate would have great growth that were underserved. And so for us, we made 2 acquisitions. We looked at, I can tell you the due diligence folder. We went through 15 different potential acquisitions over the course of my 5 years. And that's everything from tire kicking to, truly LOIs signed and the full gamut. But we probably looked at 12 to 15 businesses to acquire for our inorganic growth. And we would vet them based on a few things. One was, as I said, where do they fit in our skill set? Are they going to round out our offering in a way that will give us a client base that we can cross-sell to and vice versa? What geography? Leadership team, management team was a factor as well. And then also from a succession standpoint, what was the opportunity? Are we talking to a 58-year-old woman who has been doing this for 30 years and she's done and she's motivated, or are we talking about somebody who's in their mid 40s and still has a lot of energy and motivation, and that's a very different negotiation as well. So that's sort of the criteria we looked at. In our cases, one of the acquisitions that we actually made was a distressed agency where they were essentially closing up shop. They had good talent in a good market that was an expensive market to find talent in, and also one that represented opportunity in our mind. So we picked it up for a song and a dance, to be honest. I can't even begin to tell you the hundreds of thousands of dollars that it cost us in the short term. In terms of everything from, the executive time, the travel, the, change management, severance costs that we did take on. We didn't take on much, but we had some. There was a lot of baggage, to be honest. But what's interesting is we did it in 2015. And for context, we sold the business at the end of 2019, early 2020. So we had enough time to clean that up and turn it into value proposition on the EBITDA. There's no way we could have bought that a year before sale and been in a good spot. So you just got to align those strategies, right? Don't buy and then think you can do a quick flip.
It's not a house.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Yeah. The thing I learned on that is we had to call the client list pretty aggressively. But what we got through it was an executive team or a leadership team that was solid. And as I said, in a market that was expensive to get into. And so in the end, they became the most profitable running business unit. They became the highest growing business unit for us. And truly, one that we owe a lot of the success to in the sale because of. It took a lot. And we learned some lessons along the way. But that was an interesting one to say, if you're going to go down that route, you've got to be just mindful of what you're getting into. But if you're up for a bit of a turnaround project, it can turn out okay.
What year did you buy the second agency?
2014, so even earlier. So that's
okay.
That it was very much, we used that to create our growth and our momentum. And then we held pat for a couple of years, realized the growth, realized the strategic vision around acquiring these businesses, and then prepared to exit.
Did you know at the end of those 2 acquisitions that you were wanting to ultimately sell the agency?
Yes, the owners knew, and as I said, it was an entrepreneurial group. They had always known that there would come a day or a time to exit. So we did know that. I can't give us that much credit that it was perfectly planned, but yeah.
So it's part of the grand vision sometime somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and it's also good. I mean, it's helpful to consider that, there are always several potential avenues for ROI when you're buying, especially in a smaller agency that isn't as much of a slam dunk, right? But in addition to just the client list and the geography or the market that you're getting into, the talent, especially in this particular labor market, if you have an opportunity to buy an agency with strong talent at a reasonable multiple, that may be the exclusive reason that might carry the day, and the revenue and the client base is great.
100%.
So if you could give someone a piece of advice that's sitting at like a year out from acquisition and then like a 3 to 5 year out from acquisition, what would those pieces of advice be?
Start to plant the seeds with your key people. For us, for example, nobody other than myself knew that the transaction was happening until about a few weeks before it closed. And so, it had always been talked about, and there was always this notion that we are thinking, or the owners said always one day, and they had transitioned leadership to me and our CEO because of that. But, I think as much as it might scare people, and I get it, I think giving at least a bit of, that 1 year out, start to talk about, what the future holds, make it not cryptic. It's a fine line, but giving people the sense or notion that, there is more out there, and, there is ways that we can grow, or there are, if it's somebody that's, again, that 58-year-old saying, I'm not going to be around forever. Or even, we are looking at being bigger and better together and saying, what does the future hold for us? We always asked at the agency, no matter what, we asked we asked the same question in every strategic planning year we went into, which was, should we become more of a niche and should we shrink? Should we stay the same and try to squeak out margin? Or should we grow and focus on top line? And that was the guiding principle of every year. We asked that question, and then that would set us the course for the year. And so we weren't transparent with the team about that, though. And I think that would be what I would say, even the 3 to 5 years or the 1 year was, we knew coming in, or 2 years out, it was, let's just squeak out the EBITDA margin because we're thinking we're going to sell. Let's try to squeeze it out.
Right. To maximize multiple.
So then it became a thing where, the team wasn't aware, as we were trying to squeeze margin and really calculate the expense, not at a 1-to-1, but at a 5-to-1 or a 4-to-1. Everyone's like, oh, what? It's $5,000. Like, let's just, in my head, I'm like, no, that's $20,000. But that's what I would say to that one is one, have open, honest conversations, at least at the leadership level, about what that looks like. And then the other thing I would say that a year out is getting ready for that due diligence and getting your books in order. And again, I'm putting on my accounting hat, but the data room, if you will, that people like to use the terminology for, it's really just, do your accounts reconcile? Do you have some paperwork? Do you know where your articles of incorporation are? Do you have any stinky employee lawsuits lingering? Like, just clean up is the other one I would say. Is just clean up, get that house in order, because when it comes time to negotiation, if you know your stuff and you're organized, there is definitely an intangible value and confidence that the seller or the buyer takes in that relationship, where they know that you've got it, they have confidence in you. And if they're trying to finance the deal and you're talking to banks or private funders, it gives them confidence. And so you don't want to do anything outside of that. So those would be the big things I'd say, think about in advance.
Yeah, we've mentioned that on other podcasts too, or other episodes of this podcast, of like, time kills deals. So the longer that it takes, like, if you can have all of your data room up and running a year out, and it's like, here, like, let's keep this moving.
Oh, I was going to say, we closed our deal at the end of February 2020, and 2 weeks later,
the world shut down.
Like up here in Canada, we were like lockdown, state of emergency.
Yeah.
And so we talk about time-killing deals. I mean, we had to get them done. And if that had lingered another 6 weeks, who knows where we would have been.
You also hit on something that I think is actually really interesting, and that was true for us as well in our acquisition, which is not only is not having your deal room together and not having paperwork in order something that's going to drag out and create time that will kill the deal. It's also an opportunity to demonstrate that you guys have your shit together, that this is a leadership team worth. And I would say in our case, and I bet to some degree in yours as well, it is contributory in the negotiation process. as you're trying to push your multiple forward and you're going through negotiating the LOI, if you got a sense that like we're getting this group is on top of their game, you're going to be more willing to flex a little up in order to get that team. So that's a really, really good point. I don't think a lot of people think of, the compliance as an opportunity to drive higher value, but it can be.
And we also had, on that note, our buyer was going through the list of our customers, and where we said, okay, our average lifetime, of a client is 3.5 years. They would say, where's the contract? And if we didn't have a contract, and back in 2012 we shook hands, and there it is. Then it's like, well, don't know if we can count that.
Doesn't count. Yeah.
So that was another one of just contract cleanup and getting into good habits there.
Yeah, we always say whether you want to sell your agency or not, you should build a sellable agency, right? And it's all the things that you talked about, not just having like your shit together, but also having a leadership team and succession planning. So anyways, that you're just sort of underscoring, I think, something that we feel pretty strongly about.
Cool. I'd like to take a few minutes and just have you, like, what are you doing now? Let's talk about Morphio.
Yeah, we keep talking about Morphio, and it's definitely in this space, and it actually has an opportunity to help our listeners in a somewhat different way. So I don't know, tell us a little bit more about it.
It's focused on basically the idea of risk mitigation and peace of mind and protection on your digital marketing results. And it came out of mistakes and hard lessons we learned at the agency where, junior intern puts in a wrong daily budget in Google Ads, and instead of spending $1,000 a day, we spent $10,000 a day, and it went 3 days without being noticed. And there we go, cost us $25,000 of client media. Or
it's a real thing I've been through like more than a half a dozen times. I mean, that is like a real example.
That's right. It's painful, right? And you remember those mistakes.
Yeah.
And so, that was the notion was we were sitting there as an agency going through those pain points and also having tough conversations where you get into reporting meetings and you say, we're crushing it this month, like impressions are this, and, we got some good clicks, and, the client then just goes, well, revenue's down. Right? And you're like, we got people to your site.
Sorry.
And just that mismatch of expectations. So we built Morphio to purely focus on, protecting marketers from the risks associated with failures in digital marketing, whether that be, conversion tracking down, whether that be credit card payment failing, et cetera. And it's all about how do we give marketers information to make informed decisions. We're not like a automation platform per se, where it's like plug us in and set us and forget us. It's we're going to give you information. We're going to protect you. We're going to give you alerts. We're going to, provide you really good reporting, and then for you to make the informed strategic decisions, which is ultimately what marketers want to do, right? Is like, you want to be strategic, you want to be creative, and you want to have time with your clients. You don't want to be buried in looking for the problem. You want to be solving the problem. And that's what Morphio helps you do.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Love that.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was great. If you could you want to plug where the audience can find you, LinkedIn.
Yes. So they can go to morphio.ai, so morphio.ai, or you can find me on LinkedIn, David Bunce.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a lot of fun, man.
Appreciate
it.
Great chat.